put this away so you all know I'm not going to be singing. Before we get started, we're going to have Jasmine give a presentation of the 23rd Psalm.
Good morning. Okay, I'm going to be reciting Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Thank you.
Okay, just to give a little bit of explanation, if you're wondering why Pastor Norris is sitting down in the seat and I'm up here, he went to the dentist on Thursday and had a little bit of a problem that had to be corrected, but luckily they froze it and did everything. But to give a full sermon and everything was going to be a little bit difficult. So he gets to enjoy it a little bit. He rarely gets to just sit. So we'll also be praying for him, because I can't do this next week. Okay, the one thing that we're going to be talking about, and I guess one of the things that's really kind of neat, you heard the announcement that we do need, just for 1 week a month, children's church teacher. We also need just one night, one Wednesday a month for the Wednesday night children's program. One of the neat things about that I found when I was teaching and when I've been substituting and everything is you get to read stories, some of the old Bible stories, in a whole different light. One of the things that I did on a lesson just recently was Noah and the Ark. Now, the kids love Noah and the Ark. And a lot of times reading the Bible and things like that, I don't read that much because as you're going through, you say, I already know Noah's in the ark. And I also know a number of the other ones, Jonah and the rest of the old Bible stories and everything. So you sort of skip over it a little bit. But when you're teaching it to kids, you have to get into it a little bit more. And you know what is really neat about the Bible is the more you read into it, the more truth comes out. And there's 10 things, and they will be quick 10 things. Don't worry. Whenever I hear somebody say, I got 10 points or 10 things, they say, oh, wow, how long is this going to be? They'll be short, and we'll be out for the spaghetti dinner by noon. But there's 10 things that we can learn from Noah and the ark. And the first rule is we need to remember that the ark was built by amateurs. Now, Noah was a farmer. He was not a shipbuilder. But it's interesting to know that God picked Noah in order to build this ship. And it was very important in order to do that. For each one of us, the lesson is very clear. A lot of us feel like we're not worthy to do an awful lot of things, that we're amateurs, we're not professionals, and we can't possibly accomplish that. But all the way through the Bible, including Noah and the ark, God uses amateurs in order to accomplish his purposes. Now, you take a look at some of the examples that if you want to bring up is the David, the clay tablets, were not made of granite and everything else. They were just clay tablets. The most important document in the history were the Ten Commandments. They weren't put on marble or anything. It was just ordinary things that God used. David, when he went to face Goliath, he was not a soldier. He was not. He was a shepherd, as we all know. And he was facing Goliath, who was a professional soldier, a killer. And he knew he had all the equipment and things like that. But God uses amateurs in order to accomplish his purpose. But the one thing that we need to know is that using us as amateurs to accomplish his purpose, he also will help. And it's in Acts 1:8, it says, "But you shall receive power. After that, the Holy Spirit has come upon you." So God is going to give you the power. He gave Noah the knowledge. He gave him, even though he never built a ship in his life, Noah was given the power in that through God in order to accomplish that task. And in Philippians 4:19, it says, "I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me." Which leads to the next thing, is that in order to do this, even though we're amateurs, we've got to follow God's rule. Now take a look, and I've already got this, so you don't need to look it up. But in Genesis 6:14 and 16, this is the direction that God gave to Noah for building the ark. He said, "Make a boat from resin wood, sealing it with tar, and construct the decks and stalls throughout the ship. Make it 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. Construct a skylight all the way around the ship, 18 inches below the roof, and make 3 decks inside of the boat, a bottom, a middle, and an upper deck, and put a door on the side." Now, those are pretty specific instructions. Okay? I mean, he's telling them exactly how he wants to do it. And I'm sure if Noah, when he was doing it and started to do something wrong, God probably said, "Noah, that's not what I told you. Do it this way. The door goes on the side, not on the back." Okay? But for us, we've got to follow the instructions. And this is an important part of the story that a lot forget, okay, is in Genesis 7:5, it says, "So Noah did everything that the Lord commanded him. And he was 600 years old when the flood came." That's an important part. He did everything that God commanded him. And a lot of us, we wonder why our lives aren't fulfilled, or we're amateurs, we want to have purpose, we want to do what God wants, but we don't accomplish it because we fail to look at that one verse where it says we didn't do everything God told us to do or commanded us to do. And the other thing that's very important on this first part is that we have to act on the request. Now, Noah had to build the ark. What would happen if Noah didn't build the ark? It would have been done. When Moses was crossing the Red Sea, he was commanded by God to raise up his staff and his arms like that, and the Red Sea would split. What if he didn't do that? Every Bible story has an action component to it. Almost every one. Joshua, he had to march around Jericho 7 times, and on the 7th day they marched around 7 times, and they blew the trumpets and everything. What if he didn't do that? God always has an action component. He wants you to hear his request, he wants you to do it, and he wants you to act on it, to follow his directions and act on it. On the Passover, he had them put the blood over the top of the doorway for the death angel would pass them by. When they had manna, when they were out and wandering in the wilderness, they had to go and collect the manna. Do you think God in all his power could have just fed them without doing anything? Just, hey, you're set. You don't have to eat. You're not going to get hungry. You're going to hibernate like we have the bears do. He could have done it that way. But he wanted them to go out every day and pick up the manna. And if they did too much manna and they picked too much, what happened? It turned bitter. It was wormy. They could only get what they needed for the one day. That was the action step. God wanted them to do it and be faithful and act on his promise every single day. When Naaman came with leprosy, he had to go down in the river of Jordan and dunk himself 7 times. What if he did it only 6? I'll tell you, he wouldn't have been cured. God gave a specific request in order for him to follow it through. He did, and that was taken care of. Even Jesus had to act by going on to the cross in order to save us from our sins. That's why the devil was trying so hard to tempt him when he was in the desert not to go, to renounce God, not to go on the cross, because he knew then God's plan would not be fulfilled. Every component has an action step, and Christians need to act in order to receive Christ. It's an action step that you have to take. The next lesson that you can learn from Noah and the ark is remember that we're all in the same boat together. A lot of us tend to forget that. The devil loves people to be alone. That's when they're vulnerable. He likes you to feel that you're isolated, that you're all by yourself and nobody has this problem or had to face this problem or nobody cares. And that's when he's most effective. We talked about him tempting Christ. When did he tempt him? When he was out in the desert all by himself. Most of the time he had the disciples around him. But he was in the desert all by himself, and that's when the devil tempted him. When did he tempt Eve? When Adam was around? No. He tempted Eve when she was all by herself. We need to be together. And Christians need to get together and be together. That's why it says that in Hebrews 10:25, do not forsake gathering yourselves together. And not only that, it continues in the next verse, exhorting one another. That means holding each other up. We need to be together. We need to stay together. We need to help each other because life isn't, all that easy. So those things are extremely important. When Noah, it was his whole family that was taken on to the ark with him, not just himself. They needed to be together. When it talks in Matthew 18 and 19, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I'll be in the midst of them. So we need to be together in all the things that we're doing. I used an example at the Wolverine Association last Saturday of synergy, where if you put 2 forces together, I've used the example where they've had horses, and one horse, have you ever seen those real big Clydesdale-type workhorses? One of them could pull 4,000 pounds. The other one could pull about 4,500 pounds. But when they're teamed up together, they were able to pull a 12,000-pound load. So these are the kind of things that Christ wants us to know. The third and fourth lesson that we get from Noah, and they're kind of together because it has to do with critics and everything, both in the church and outside the church. The third one is don't listen to the critics. Just get on with the job that needs to be done. Or, the fourth one, when you're on an ark, somebody needs to control the woodpeckers. We're going to have critics outside, and they were making fun of Noah. Okay, he's building a boat in the middle of a desert practically. There's not water for another 800 miles around him. And can you imagine? He's building this big boat. He had a lot of people criticizing him, making fun of him. But even worse than that is you also have people on the inside that also are critics. Now, when he dealt with his critics, all the time, he was ridiculed before the flood came. You notice nobody criticized him when the rain started. They were actually pounding on the door, begging for him to open up the door. Joshua, I'm going to tell you, and it doesn't say that in the Bible, but I can imagine, he's a military leader, and they come up to Jericho, which was one of the strongest fortified forts back then, and The military come in and said, okay, how are we going to take this one? Frontal assault? Are we going to, use the ramrods? We're going to burn them out. What are we going to do here? And Joshua says, well, what we're going to do is we're going to march around and blow our trumpets on the first day. And then we're going to march around the second day. We're going to do that for a week. And then on the seventh day, get this, we're going to march around 7 times and blow our trumpets. And the walls will all fall down. Can you imagine what his advisor, they're starting looking at him and, believe me, he was criticized for that. They didn't believe what was going on. And Moses out in the wilderness, read some of that. Moses calls the people that were in the wilderness a stiff-necked people. Okay? They said, why did you bring us out into this desert to die? Why don't you just leave us in Egypt? We could die just as well there. They made his life miserable. So if you're doing God's will, you've got to understand you're going to have critics or you're going to have woodpeckers, but we need to be careful of that. Okay? When you're especially on the ark. In Luke 21:17, it says, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. The ones that you've got to be more concerned with are critics that are supposedly Christians. Paul dealt with that in a number of his letters on people that were literally breaking up some of the churches. He talks about the troublemakers in the church, gossips, complainers, the hypocrites. And you've got to be careful and concerned about that. What Paul says very clearly in Romans 16:17, Paul described the crafty leads of the Satan, but he said this about those gossips that were in the church. Says, stay away from those who cause divisions and are upsetting people's faith. So you need to be careful about that and stay away from those that are those type of critics. Now, what we have to do is we've got to keep our eyes on Christ. And that's going to be the most important things. For we wrestle against the not flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the rulers of darkness in this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, which it talks about in Ephesians. When threatened by all of these things, the way you do it is you've got to keep your eyes on Christ. The people that know their God will be strong and will resist them. And it says in the Bible we need to put on the whole armor of God. And what does that have to do with? It's the truth, faith, salvation. God's approval is the breastplate, but most importantly, it's the Bible. The fifth thing that we've got to learn from Noah is when you're stressed, you need to float for a while. Stephen Covey wrote a number of books now, but his first one was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he said, I'm going to find out what the most effective people are. I'm going to study them and find out what they all had in common. And he came out with 7 characteristics. We don't have time to go into all of them, but one of the important ones that we can take from Noah is a whole section that he calls it sharpening the sword. Or sharpening the saw, not the sword. And he uses the example, have you ever tried to cut down a tree with a dull saw? It takes you forever. But if you just take your time, have the saw sharpened, boom, you can go right through that wood in a minute. He said a lot of times it's important just to step back and take it easy. In Noah's time, it's floating for a while. And Noah had some time when he was on the ark. What floodwaters were there? I think it was 150 days. The name Noah, and this is interesting, means rest or comfort. And what that comes from is that Noah was in constant contact with God through prayer. And in James 5:16, it says, the earnest prayers of a righteous person has great power and wonderful results. And in Matthew 21:22, it says, "In all things whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive." Now, you read that verse, and everybody forgets a certain word in there. Okay? And it's kind of the action step we were talking about. And they read it like this: "And all things whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, ye shall receive." What did I leave out? Believing. There's a condition there. And if you really don't believe, it's not going to happen. Christians a lot of times conveniently take that part out. There's a story I've told before, and I've always appreciated this, and it was supposedly a true story, and it happened that they had a drought, and I can't even remember what country. I wasn't going to use this, but it just came to me. They had a drought, and so the people were praying, and they prayed, and they prayed, and they prayed in order for rain to come. And finally they were praying, and they said, "We've got to go out, and we're just going to all get together, and we're all going to pray. All the faiths, all the churches, everything. Let's all that believe in God, let's go and pray." And so they all did. And all of them came, and some had their Bibles with them, and some we had rosaries, and they had all these religious items and things like that. And they were going to pray until it rained. The interesting part of the whole story, though, is one little girl came to that meeting, and she carried the one item that really affects that verse. What she brought was an umbrella. That is believing. And a lot of the times we'll pray or we'll do this, and we really don't believe down deep. And if that's the case, where it's not going to be effective. The sixth thing is speed isn't always an advantage. The snails were on board just as well as the cheetahs were, the fastest animal in the world. The snails got on there, and so did the cheetahs. Speed makes no difference whatsoever. Now, Noah would be considered a late bloomer, all right? He was like 600 years old, and even in those times when you live to be 900, that's still getting up there in years. There's nothing much about Noah any place else in the Bible until we come to the ark. Okay, you don't hear about, all we know about Noah is that his father was, I think it was Lamar. Anyways, he was the 11th descendant from Adam. That's all it says. Okay? He led most of his life. He was a righteous man. He was a religious person. But you don't know that much about him at all in his younger life. But some of the late bloomers can be the most effective. And it means that no matter where you are in your stage of life right now, God can still use you and is looking to use you. They have a parable of the laborers, and it's in Matthew, and we won't go through the whole thing. But what basically the parable is this farmer wanted his field to be harvested. So he said, I'll pay a pence or a penny back then. I'll pay a day's pay. And some people started at 6 o'clock, and then a little bit later, he still needed more people out there. They came at 9 o'clock, so he had them work. Some came at noon, and some came at 3 o'clock. And at the end of the day, he paid them all a day's pay. Now, the ones that were there at 6 o'clock were complaining and everything, and basically the parable is about, we had an agreement that you would work, and that would be the pay. It doesn't matter when you came to the Lord. Whether you're in the early part of the day, the middle part of the day, the end of the day, or whenever, it's still going to get the same result, salvation. And it's the same thing here. God can use any one of you Anytime, whether you're 60 years old, whether you're 80 years old, whether you're 20 years old, whether you're in high school or even junior high, God can use you if you're opened up to that. There's studies that were done, and a lot of people strive in high school and things like that, and they did a study on valedictorians, of the ones that got straight A's and everything, all in high school, and voted most likely to succeed. Do you know what? When they did those studies 30 years later, straight A's didn't mean much. They weren't the most likely to succeed. A lot of people blossom later in life. Just because you get straight A's in high school does not guarantee you're going to be successful later on in life. There's some ones that are just mediocre all the way through school, and then they bloom later on in life, and they really do extremely well. So God can use you at any time, even like Noah at 600 years. The seventh thing is stay fit. When you're 600 years old, sometime God might ask you to do something really important, regardless of your age. Okay? And basically what we had talked about, Noah really walked with God. In Genesis 6:9, it says, Noah found grace in the eyes of God. So Noah really was. That was the most important. Not his age, not his abilities. He was an amateur, like we said. And I mean, that's the last thing Noah felt that God was going to ask him to do, was to build a boat. But he was able to find his purpose in life. Many of you probably asked the main question, what am I going to do that matters? Or why am I here? Why is it important? I remember when I was in college, I was a senior, I was driving down, I was doing student teaching. I was early in the morning driving down I-94, and luckily in my dad's car, and the front tire blew. And I was going, back then the speed limit was like 70. I was going a little bit faster than that. And the front tire blew out, and the car spun around 3 times, I remember distinctly, because I was watching this whole thing. And I ended up going down 94. It was in Romulus, so it was down towards the airport area, in between Ann Arbor and the airport. I was going backwards, not 90, on 94. I was going about 75 or so. And I was ending up backwards, and I decided I better look to see where the car's going. So I looked in the back, and I saw a bridge that was coming. You know how 94 it curves over this way? And then there was a bridge, and then there was another road underneath there. And I was figuring, I'm going to hit that bridge, go on over, go down, and then, this is the morning rush hour. I'm going to get hit again by these other cars coming. And I remember thinking to myself, well, at least I got the best seat in the house. I honestly remembered thinking that. What happened is I'm going down there, 70-some miles an hour backwards, and I hit this, these guardrails that they have, the metal type thing. The car hooked up on that, and here was the bridge, the car hooked up on here, and I just went boop, boop, and right straight down that way, and just slid. Now, I'm still going backwards. And underneath, there was other cars that had to hit that because it wasn't a straight piece of metal. It was riveted, where it was bent before for other cars that hit it. And I'm watching the parts of the car going out underneath, down I-94. Because that thing was ripping everything underneath the car right out. I saw my muffler go. I saw all kinds of things going down there. It was spread all over. And I had my foot on the brake the whole time. And finally I came to a stop. And when I looked out around, there was not a single car on 94. They were all parked on the side. And they were all getting out of the car, and they had umbrellas and that, and they were running over to see if I was okay. But what they did is when I started doing my little spinning job, they just got out of the way, which was really kind of smart, okay? Now, after that was all over, I remember thinking, I guess God still needs me for something. Because if he didn't need me around here, I would have been over that bridge and down. That would have been it. Many of you probably have similar experiences where you came a near-death type of experience or something. But God still has a reason for you to be here. And one of the things is you need to find out what that reason is. The eighth one is, remember that it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. It's an important concept. It wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. Jesus compares Noah and the times with the end times. It's very clear in Matthew 24, 37 to 39. I'll just read this real quick. It says very clearly, but as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. In other words, the people never thought this flood was going to come, even though Noah and Matt told them it was coming, and that's why it was building the ark. They were still going on with their everyday lives. It tells a parable of the fig tree, and it says when you see the things blossom and everything, the fig tree blossom, you better know summer's coming and the spring is coming. I mean, it's a clear sign of nature. And it's the same thing here, and he relates it directly to Revelation. Obviously, and we don't have time to go into all the different signs and things like that, but a couple of the signs are increased knowledge. Take a look at that. From one half of all of man's knowledge has been gained in the last 20 years. From the founding of our country up until 1950, it doubled. The knowledge in the United States and the world, it doubled. From there until 1900, it doubled. From 1900 to 1950, it doubled again. From 1950 to 1958, it doubled again. We're doubling the knowledge in the world almost every 5 years. It's to the extent libraries can't even keep track of all of it. 90% of the scientists are living today. In the history of the world, 90% of the scientists are still alive today. And that's how oriented we are to the knowledge. Another one is going to be the rebirth of Israel. And that's happened. Israel is a nation. Anybody up until 1947 would never have believed that Israel would have ever become a nation on their own. It took the Holocaust, really, for the Jewish people to realize they needed to stick together. There's moral perversion, and this is probably one of the main things. And I won't go into all the details because I don't want to depress everybody. But I'm going to read from 2 Timothy 3, 1 to 5. And you tell me, and this is what it was like, okay, before the flood. Tell me what it sounds like today. It says, "This also know, that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truth breakers, false accusers, fierce despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof." What does that sound like? That sounds like today. One of the best quotes I've ever heard was from Billy Graham, and I've said this a couple of times. Billy Graham said that God will either have to judge America or apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Listen to that. God will either have to apologize, will either have to judge America or apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Nowhere in the Bible will you find God apologizing. Okay? You will find him judging. As in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the end times. The ninth one says that no matter the storm, when you're with God, there's always a rainbow waiting. And now these last two are more for the Christians. That floods raged for 40 days and 40 nights. The flood waters were over 20 feet highest than the highest mountain known in the world. After those 150 days, it says in the 8th chapter of Genesis, it says God didn't forget about Noah and all the animals on the boat, in the boat. He sent a wind to blow across the waters, and the floods began to disappear. For the subterranean water sources ceased their gushing, and the torrential rains subsided. So the flood gradually receded. And this is the promise that he gave. And then God told Noah and his sons, I solemnly promise to you and your children on the animals you brought with you, all the birds and the cattle and the wild animals, that I will never again send another flood to destroy the earth. And I seal this promise with a sign. I have placed a rainbow in the clouds as a sign of my purpose until the end of time, to you and all of earth. When I said clouds over the earth, the rainbow will be seen in the clouds. And I remember my promise to you and to everything, and never again will floods come to destroy all life. For I will see the rainbow in the clouds and remember my eternal promise. For the believer, okay, it's heaven. And that's going to be, for Noah, I can imagine all of those animals having to clean up after them. I mean, can you imagine the smell? Heaven to him was having those waters go down and opening that door and letting them all go. Okay? For Christians, it's when God returns. And from there, we'll be in heaven. What you can expect in the first minute after you die? The Bible's pretty clear on it. In Luke 17:22, Lazarus was, quote, carried by angels into Abraham's bosom. Immediately in the presence of the departure of the Spirit, and you're immediately in the presence of the Lord. And the neat thing about that is all you have to do is remember that thief on the cross. Forget all the theology and everything else. And you remember you had the two, Christ on the cross, and you had the two thieves, one on each side. And the one on the right side believed and said, surely this is the Son of Man. And what Jesus said prior to him dying on the cross, he said, today thou shalt be with me in paradise. Okay? It's that simple. When Stephen, one of the apostles, was stoned in Acts 7:56, he said his last words, behold, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. That's a neat verse. Okay? And that is after the flood's over, after this life is over, we're going to see Christ. D.L. Moody had said before he died, soon you will read in the papers that Moody is dead. Don't believe it. For in that moment, I will be more alive than I have ever been. In heaven, there'll be no more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain, no hunger, and no thirst. Which leads to the 10th lesson that we can learn from Noah's flood. And the story of Noah's Ark. Very simply, don't miss the boat. Don't miss the boat. In Proverbs 14:12, it says, there is a way that seems right unto man, but the end of that way is death. Okay, and many people are going to be missing that boat. It says that wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there will go in there at. Because straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth into life, and few there be that find it. One of the neatest stories, when I was younger, I went to Honey Rock Camp, which is in northern Wisconsin, and Wheaton College sponsors that in Wheaton, Illinois. And I heard the story, the first time I heard the story of Jim Elliott, who was a student at Wheaton College. I don't know if you still know the story, but he and two others went down into South America to reach a tribe that had never been reached ever. And when they got in there and the plane dropped them off on the riverbank, the Indians were so fearful of them, they never saw people like that, and they were killed. When they came back and they read Jim Elliott's diary, he had written, "He is no fool to give up that which he cannot keep, to gain that which he cannot lose." And I think that's a real important thing to keep in mind on the thing with Noah and the ark. So remember, the ark was built by amateurs. Okay, you don't have to be professional to be used by God. We're all in the same boat together, and we need to stick together and work together. Third thing you remember is don't listen to the critics or the woodpeckers. Okay, fifth thing is when you're stressed, float a little while and pray. Get refreshed in God. The sixth one is speed isn't always an advantage. Okay, no matter when you come to the Lord, you're there. Stay fit. You never know when you're going to be called, even if you're 600 years old. Eighth one, remember, it wasn't raining when they started building the boat. The ninth one, when you're with God, there's always a rainbow at the end. And for us, it's going to be heaven. But finally, don't miss the boat. Pastor Norris?